Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our roundtable discussion on promoting women leadership in higher education. We're very honored to have Professor Janet Beer, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Liverpool, with us today. But also, we're very delighted to have in the audience many male leaders in higher education who come to share the views on women leadership in higher education, particularly since I know Peter as a he for she ambassador in higher education as well. This morning we will have a brief round of introduction to some of the issues on women leadership in higher education. I'll start off with some background of why we're organizing this. This is a roundtable organized by the Task Force on Women and Family-Friendly Policies at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, which set up last year to look into issues of challenges that our female colleagues are experiencing. But we also recognize that for our male colleagues, they also are facing challenges of family responsibilities. In fact, we want to encourage our male colleagues to look more into the family responsibilities as well by facilitating an enabling environment. So I'll give you a little bit more background on the task force a little bit later. It is also co-organized by our Gender Research Center, which is the first research center on gender issues in Hong Kong. It was set up in 1985, and it has been very effective in promoting and advocating gender equality in Hong Kong, and also starting the gender studies program at the university, which is the only curriculum on gender issues in Hong Kong. So I'd like to give you a little bit background before I introduce Janet on the situation in Hong Kong. Many people in Hong Kong would say that now the university is dominated by women. It's just because we started to have a slightly more female undergraduates in the universities, whereas previously female students constituted 1/3 of the student body. Now, over the 8 UGC-funded tertiary institutions, we have 53% female. For research postgraduate, female students only constitute 43%. Overall faculty members, there are only about 1/3 female faculty members. For deans who are either through search or elected, there are only 4%, which means there are only 2 female deans in all of the 8 institutions in Hong Kong. And for provosts, pro-vice-chancellor, vice-chancellors, they constitute 13%. And if you count the numbers, there are only 4 of them in Hong Kong, and 2 of them are here at the Chinese University. We still do not have a vice-chancellor or president who is a female yet. So we're very glad that Janet here as a vice-chancellor, first female vice-chancellor at the University of Liverpool. The task force that we have set up at CUHK, we started work last year to compile sex disaggregated data to monitor the status of women, because I think facts and figures speaks much better than just slogans and advocacy. We have surveyed faculty members on the needs for mentoring and support with special attention to women. In fact, we are hoping to set up a female faculty support network. And I hope our colleagues here may give us more input as to what they hope the university can provide in terms of this support network. We also have set up facilities for breastfeeding for female colleagues. We have 3 of them are in operation now. The 4th one will be coming on board in September. And so at least provide a safe and hygienic environment for women faculty members and staff who want to do breastfeeding or milk pumping or lactation for the newborn babies. We're working with the Personnel Office to review and promote personnel policies on paternity leave, on options for tenure deferment due to maternity leave and other policies that can facilitate women tenure here. But I think more importantly, we want to raise awareness of senior management and male colleagues to establish a more gender-sensitive culture and system, because many of the issues are more implicit, and oftentimes it's the unconscious biases that affect the advancement of women. Well, this is one of the nursing rooms that is already in operation, so spread the word. We'll be promoting it in the September newsletter. And actually, I have to give credit to T.F. Falk, who is our co-convener, who has helped us to set the standards for these nursing rooms. If you look at the history of the Chinese U, we started with 0 before our 50th anniversary. And I still remember standing at the 50th anniversary being the lonely female there. And at least now we have 2 female pro-vice chancellors at the fellowship conferment ceremony. So we're up to 40% now, but no, I think it's not just the numbers. I think we need to have a more supportive environment for all female staff at the university. So at this, I'd like to invite Professor Janet Beer to give us a little bit more sharing of her experience. She is the first Vice Chancellor at the University of Liverpool. Previously, she was the Vice Chancellor at Oxford Brookes University. And while she was there, she has been very effective in promoting the representation of women faculty members and also introducing flexible workplace policies to enhance the opportunities for women as well as for men with family responsibilities. So Janet will give us an overview of her experiences in the UK, and after that we'll invite Professor Suzanne Choi, who was the former co-director of our Gender Research Center, to give her responses and see what we can do at the Chinese University. So let us welcome Professor Janet Beer.
Thank you very much, Fanny. I'm delighted to be here. Right, Fanny asked me in particular to focus this morning on what we're doing in the UK, what practical steps we're taking to change the situation. So I am going to talk about some interventions that are being made on a national level, as well as to talk about what the situation is at the moment in terms of absences and presences. So what can be done, what is being done, something about appointment processes and about development programs. Also about the wider context, so what's happening, for instance, in the private sector in terms of the imperative toward getting more women on boards, particularly in the FTSE 100 and 250, and seeing what's transferable and what's not between different sectors in the economy. And I'm in particular going to have a detailed look at Athena Swan. Now, do many people here know what Athena Swan is? Yeah, so I will do quite a detailed look at Athena Swan because it's something that has developed in the UK, got a real charge from an intervention by the Chief Medical Officer, and I think Peter's ex-colleagues were none too pleased when Dame Sally Davis intervened in the way she did. I'll explain more about that in a minute. But, you know, every morning when I wake up, my first words are, God bless Dame Sally Davis, because she has made more difference with the intervention that she made, which as I said, I'll talk about later, than anything else, I think, in terms of moving things along rapidly in the UK. I'm also going to talk about another couple of development programs that are available that could easily be duplicated in other areas. So just a few numbers to begin with. As here, women are over 50% of the workforce. And my favourite statistic in my new institution, where I've had less time to have an impact is that on the professional services side, so the director of estates, the director of finance, the director of HR, etc., 63% of the workforce are women and 63% of the directors are women. It's perfect, isn't it? Perfect match. 55% of academic staff are women, 18% are professors. So that's the challenge. So there's work to do at Liverpool. Not that nothing has been done, but it's in earlier stages than it is in my previous institution, where we had moved things up to 30% professorial appointments were women, from a base about the same as Liverpool, and I was there for 7.5 years. At the moment, this is according to Norma Jarboe, who does an annual survey of women in leadership positions in universities, and so on the executive side, but also board membership. So it's called Women Count, and she does an annual, I think it's a 2-yearly report, actually. So at the moment, 20% of vice-chancellors in the UK are women. But it is the case that they are concentrated in the lower turnover institutions. So even when they're running a big university, typically one of the big northern urban post-92s, they are in charge of smaller budgets. Okay, now there are 3 women in the Russell Group. So there's Imperial, Manchester and Liverpool, and as you will all know, Louise Richardson has just been appointed from St Andrews to move to Oxford. So there'll be 4 out of the 24 in the Russell Group, and that's gone from just Nancy only 2 years ago, and then Alice Gast at Imperial, then me, and now Louise. So those numbers are moving. 12% of governing bodies, university councils, are chaired by women, and 19% have more than 40% or more women membership. Now, that's not bad, but Norma's work has also shown that where you have a critical mass of women on a governing body, a woman is more likely to be appointed to the vice-chancellorship. So this begins to give a sense that this is not just about paying attention to the way in which we appoint. It's about what senior people look like in institutions. It's about cultures. It's about assumptions. So, again, who's heard of the 30% Club? Yeah. So this is an organisation in the UK led by Helena Morrissey and Melanie Richards. And they are advocates of voluntary targets, okay, so not quotas, voluntary targets. And their ambition is to get board membership in the FTSE 100 and 250 up to 30% with a date. And I'm going to talk about something that Mervyn Davies, Lord Davies, has been leading in the UK. An early he for she, if you like, initiative. Now, they, as I said, they support targets but not quotas. And recently, Helena and colleagues have set up an HE working party, and I'm on that, as is the Elizabeth Treasure, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Cardiff. And we are trying to bring the best practice from the private sector into universities. Now, this is not a sentence that you find yourself uttering very often, because we often feel superior in universities, that we do things in a more equal and enlightened and evidence-informed way. But actually, it turns out not to be the case at the moment in terms of gender equality. The imperatives in business are felt more sharply than they are at the moment in higher education. And, it just is a very interesting situation, and I'm absolutely not too proud to learn from the private sector in this regard. The last time we did a snapshot of women rectors in the European Union, there were 15.5% of women leaders. So that's reasonably dated now. It's 2010, the last statistic I was able to get, so things could have changed in 5 years. Now, one of the things that the 30% clubs say when they're talking about their voluntary targets is that in Norway, which we all know is the most famous example of quotas being imposed and being achieved within the timescale, is that yes, these women are on boards, but they're not in CEO positions. In fact, CEO positions have got worse for women. So the culture hasn't changed. The numbers have changed at board level, but they haven't changed in senior management. Now, that is true. We have the evidence. But I'm not totally against quotas, and would think that if the worst came to the worst, that we may need to move to quotas if progress wasn't being demonstrated in other ways. But they are very firmly against quotas, and the example they give in terms of Norway is that it's not moved things along in terms of senior leadership, only in terms of board membership. And incidentally, one of the sticks that is used to beat advocates of quota in the Norwegian fashion with is that they say that there's a new breed of woman that they call golden skirts. Has anyone heard this term? Golden skirts. It means they're on lots of boards. So somebody, of course, an academic, did some work on this, and there are just as many golden trousers as there are golden skirts. But nobody pays attention to the fact that, you know, a man has multiple board memberships. It's just that, you know, because there was a hurry. One of the things that's been going on as a result of Lord Davis's ambition, declared ambition, as the government champion on this front, to get 25% board membership for women by 2015. Now, this was a declared ambition in 2011, and the numbers have doubled. So we're now on 23.5%, so we're not that far away from the 25% that was the ambition in 2015. But one of Lord Davis's colleagues tells me that particularly amongst FTSE 100 chairmen, because I think they possibly all were at that point, there was a sense of panic that somebody might take all the best women. So, and because obviously there's a finite number of best women. Wouldn't be 50% of the population or anything like that. I was once on a panel with the former shadow education minister, and someone asked, Shabana Mahmood, and someone said to her, well, what, because she verges on advocating quotas. Somebody said to her, well, what if a poorly performing woman is appointed to a board? She said, in that unlikely event, we're just going to have to find a poorly performing man for her to replace. So, you know, it's all these things. And at the end of what I'm going to say this morning, I want to put forward some objections to taking positive action in some light that I think might form grounds for discussion. But to go back to higher education, so the 2015 grant letter from our department, our government department, Business Innovation and Skills, signed by Greg Clark, the Minister, and by Vince Cable, the then Secretary of State, said this: equality and diversity are vital at all levels, also in senior leadership. For example, currently only 1 VC in 5 is female, and we believe the sector should go much further to seek out and harness the diverse talent available. We would like the Council to continue, this is the Higher Education Funding Council for England, to continue working with the Council of University Chairs and other sector bodies to help ensure that higher education governors and senior managers are drawn from the full range of excellent people, including those who are underrepresented at the top level of higher education. This is a good steer, obviously. It's a very good steer. We're very pleased to see it in black and white, but it wasn't backed up by any suggestions for action, positive action that might be taken. Nor was it given the status that Vince Cable had already given Mervyn Davies in making him a champion in terms of private sector boards. So I was quite disappointed that they hadn't said, all right, Lord Davies will extend his remit to higher education, because he has an interest in this, and he has a particular interest in ensuring that private sector boards and university boards, indeed university senior leaders, have some exchange of personnel between private and university sectors. You know, one of the things that we do very poorly in the UK compared to the US is to get senior thought leaders, leading policy people into government. With the revolving door that took Condoleezza Rice in and out of government, that took Larry Summers in and out of government, etc. That doesn't exist in the UK, and I don't know whether you're better at it in Hong Kong in terms of using the nation's intellectual riches. So there's no champion for this, although vice-chancellors are signing up for he for she. I'd sign for it, but I'm not eligible to sign for he for she. So I'm she for she and he. But it's a good initiative, because no one is pretending that 50% of the population can change things on their own. We need all of us to sign up to the value of gender and other equality and diversity imperatives. So just to say a few things that are going on in the UK. The Leadership Foundation is one of a number of sector bodies which has been funded by the Higher Education Funding Council for England, along with the Equality Challenge Unit and indeed the Higher Education Academy and other organisations. These are now not going to be funded by HEFC because, as you know, the funding system, the funding regime has changed in the UK, and the Funding Council is no longer going to be responsible for, in a sense, supporting sector agencies. That money must come from the individual universities. So the Leadership Foundation is a combination of subscription from us, from member universities, but also paying for programs. Now, they've developed a new program called Aurora. So I urge you to have a look at it on the LF website. The third cohort is about to start. Now, this is aimed at women ambitious for leadership positions, okay, so kind of senior lecturer level. And the first 2 years have had 700 women on average attending. So you can see there is a hunger for this. That's from 128 universities. And I know in my previous institution at Oxford Brookes, we had 12 sign up for it last year. I think we sent 9 on the first year, and there are similar numbers going in through from Liverpool. Now, the demography of the 2 years that have gone through, 4% are under 30, 41% are in the target range, which is 30 to 39, because you will know, as I know, that the point at which women fall out of the workforce is typically between 30 and 39. This is where our pipeline has a big hole, has a big leak. Okay, so this is the crucial point. And this is not just in universities, this is in private sector as well. The pipeline leaks badly between these ages. So 41% were in that age range, 42% 40 to 49, and 13% 50 plus. So this is a year-long program, and they go to day-long sessions in a variety of different regional locations. And one of the things that the institution must do for the participants is have mentors for all of them while they're undergoing the program, and ideally after as well. And also have role models, senior people, generally women, but it doesn't have to be, who attend and convene a learning set or a round table at the individual day events. And also there are institutional champions. That won't surprise you to know that in my previous institution I was institutional champion, and my successor, Professor Alistair Fitt, is still has taken over as institutional champion. I am institutional champion at the University of Liverpool. Oxford Brookes and the University of Liverpool are the only 2 universities where the institutional champion is the Vice-Chancellor. So I think that's a shame. But one of the things that we did fairly well about 18 months ago Roberta Blackman-Woods, who's the MP for Durham and who convenes for the House of Commons the university parliamentary network, organised a breakfast for vice-chancellors to discuss gender equality issues, and every single one of them sent a woman from their senior team, except the Vice-Chancellor of Abertay and the head of the Royal Veterinary College. So I feel I have to mention them because they're, they are the exceptions. But isn't that interesting? So we were going to talk about advancing women leadership, so they sent all their women. So, and one of the things Aurora does, and this is my only kind of gripe with the way they've set it up, is it's about, the program is about women valuing themselves. I'll say a little bit about its aims in a minute. It's about making sure that you are, that you're not selling yourself cheap, that you're confident, etc. And yet it is predicated on the free labour of the mentors, the role models, the institutional champions. So, all these things are provided by institutions for the participants because we care about the participants, but the programme is predicated on, ironically, the free labour of women. So I have suggested to the Chief Exec that for every, this many mentors, this many role models, this many, etc., that you get fee remission. I think she's digesting that one at the moment. So, so the aims of the Aurora programme are to enable the participants to understand organisations and the HE sector better, to develop leadership behaviours, skills and knowledge. There's also some significant input on overcoming barriers and obstacles, growing confidence and a leadership identity. Now, again, many of you will know that this is one of the crucial difficulties for women. What does a leader look like? Too often it's a 6'4" physicist, sadly, but, the leadership identity and the kind of confidence to be yourself is something that needs attention. And also building networks and coalitions, what we might call in other contexts political savvy. So those are the aims of the Aurora programme, and judging by the enthusiasm of the participants that I have had experience of now in 2 institutions, then it is fulfilling many of these aims. It's not consistently brilliant, but what training and development programme is, but there is enough of significant value in it. One of the things that we were determined to do in my previous institution was when the women came back from it, for them not to feel, is that it? So I've had the training programme and nothing has changed in my life. So to use them as the kind of front, if we need a project, a task and finish group, so say to them, right, you've done this now, lead this for the institution. This is a finite timescale, put together the group, here's the task, do that. It's great project management, but also leadership. So try and harness the ambition and the skills that they have amassed whilst doing that programme, and give them power within the institution to effect real change. Top management programme is another leadership foundation programme. Now, a study was done a couple of years ago by my colleague at Oxford Brookes, Simonetta Manfredi, working with others, on outcomes for participants in the top management programme. Many vice-chancellors in the UK. Peter, I don't know, did you do it? Yes, there you are, there's another alum. So, me too. Something like 50 out of the 135 institutions with university in their title, VCs have done the top management programme. So it is something that many people do as preparation for leadership. It's a cohort of about 15 to 20, and it's a year-long or close to year-long programme. It starts off with a 1 day, then there's a week's residential, then there is a week overseas, and then another week later on in the year. And this is about personal development for future leaders. Typically it's PVC level participants or directors of services, registrars, etc. So future leaders, the contribution that can be made and that they will make. Again, leadership skills, political savvy, and networking. When I did it, I don't know what Peter's experience was, the networking was the thing that I took away of most value from it. I can't tell you that the quality of the input was hugely beneficial, death by PowerPoint in many instances, but there were highlights when, actually, mainly when current leaders came in to talk to us about their experience, and we were exposed to those people overseas as well. Although I did have a moment where one of the conveners of top management programme, Robin Middlehurst, when I underwent it, where I had to be held back from assaulting a rector of a Belgian university who told me that male PhD students were the only ones worth having because they could complete because their wives looked after them. So, down, Janet, I think she said. So, it also foregrounds workforce strategy and planning, and spends quite a lot of time on teamwork, on succession planning, which is something that in a sense is what we're concerned with today, isn't it? It's about succession planning, it's about the pipeline, it's about a balanced workforce. And since Simonetta and colleagues undertook the work on outcomes for TMP participants, they have now included a gender and diversity component in that. It wasn't there before, it certainly wasn't there when I did it, but now they are paying attention to it. The learning opportunities that they get are exposing them to different higher education systems, and they are there to observe and exchange good practice. So these are two of the major development opportunities for colleagues in higher education at senior levels in the UK at the moment. And the other thing that I wanted just to talk about is Athena Swan. So this was founded in 2005, and it's a scheme that recognises commitment to advancing women's careers in higher education and research. Now, it was specifically for the STEM disciplines when it was set up. And it was, when I first joined the board of the Equality Challenge Unit in 2007, pretty much a minority interest and a minority sport. So people knew about it. It had some very high profile champions, senior women scientists, Jocelyn Bell-Burnett and Athene Donald, who were, Aurora champions. But it didn't have much purchase, I think. Would you say that was fair? Yeah, it was. So people knew about it, but they weren't desperately committed to it. Then, see, I love this story. And I'm just trying to find the precise date. Dame Sally Davis, who I've already mentioned, said, after she'd had a particularly bruising round of research bids into the National Institute for Health Research, that any university who wanted access to NIHR funding from 2015 onwards, I think this was about 2011, 2012? Yeah, had to have Athena Swan Silver, which I'll explain what that is in a minute. At which point, there was much fulmination and public outrage from some of my Vice-Chancellor colleagues, and Peter knows who I mean, and much outrage and high dudgeon. But the Equality Challenge Unit, which runs Athena Swan, was not responsible. Dame Sally was responsible for this, and what she was responsible for was changing behaviours at a more rapid rate than anyone could have, including her, could have envisaged. What she noticed was that she was having senior colleagues in from hospitals, and they were quite gender balanced. Now we think of, senior medics as not, having a particularly balanced workforce, but she was getting in senior panels from hospitals that were quite balanced, and then she was getting in all male senior teams from universities, and she asked one group why that was the case and got an answer something along the lines of, and we've all heard people do it in our time, something along the lines of, well, we like women, of course we do. Some of us even have them as mothers, you know, and wives and what have you, but we don't seem to have any, you know, to hand kind of thing. So dramatically unsatisfied was she with this that she decided to make the funding commitment. So what the Athena Swan Charter is it is open to any university or indeed publicly funded research institute that's committed to the advancement of the careers of women. Members are able to submit for the Athena Swan Charter either at institutional or department level, and it's based on an in-depth self-assessment that's reviewed by a panel drawn from higher education. So it's peer-reviewed, as are many of our processes in academia. And people wanting to develop, wanting to join, are supported throughout the process with workshops, guidance, opportunities to learn and share good practice. So it was founded, as I've said, in 2005 with 10 founding members, and it now has 132 members and 462 award-holding departments and institutions. Dame Sally had to put an injection of £100,000 into the Equality Challenge Unit to cope with the demand that her initiative stimulated. So, and applications went from kind of 2 a year to 100 overnight. Just amazing. So the success of the Charter stems partly from the fact that it had great foundations. It was really well founded to begin with, and so it was robust enough to stand the test of this upsurge. And it was set up by academic women in science for academic women in science. And the aim was to level the playing field by getting institutions and departments to conduct a thorough self-assessment, as I've already said, of their policies and procedures. And this self-assessment has to be led and championed by senior academics and senior management in order to ensure sustainable change and buy-in from the top. And one of the interesting features of Athena Swan is that you have to demonstrate continuous improvement. You can't stay still and retain your award. So if you're a bronze holder, you have to improve to keep your bronze. And this is, again, a thing that people don't like. Because somebody, in a sense, can be given a bronze award who's not as good as you in another institution, but that's not the point. They've got a bronze award. Now they have to demonstrate improvement in order to keep it. But and you might have two departments in the same university where one is much better than the other, you know, palpably better, but loses bronze because they've just thought, oh, job done. But it's not the case. You have to keep improving, which is one of the benefits. Now, one of the things that ECU has been abjured to do on the back of the success of Athena Swan post Sally Davies's intervention is to extend the work of the Charter across other disciplines. Okay, so in response to that feedback from the sector, the Equality Challenge Unit developed Gender Equality Mark, and also there's a Race Equality Mark which is being trialled now as we speak. But again, in response to demand from the sector, rather than rolling out a separate Gender Equality Mark for humanities, social science, etc., disciplines outside STEM, they've decided to merge it. People have no appetite for running two schemes, so they want to make the Athena Swan, in a sense, a fit for purpose for arts, humanities, social science, business and law, etc. So the new processes are being rolled out now. And the Charter, in addition to being expanded, by 2017 all applicants will be signed up to new principles that have been extended, and this is really important, to cover professional and support staff as well. And so it will now be across the whole of a university, and so there won't be any divisions between people either in different disciplines or different bits of our organisations. And the new Athena Swan Charter principles will reflect the progressive nature of the Charter, and reinforcing that message I've already referred to, that you can never rest on your laurels. So expectations will change as the sector progresses in terms of the pursuit of equality. So just to let you know what the principles are, this is what members sign up to. We acknowledge that academia cannot reach its full potential unless it can benefit from the talents of all. We commit to advancing gender equality in academia, in particular addressing the loss of women across the career pipeline and the absence of women from senior academic, professional and support roles. We commit to addressing unequal gender representation across academic disciplines and professional and support functions. In this, we recognise disciplinary differences, including the relative underrepresentation of women in senior roles in arts, humanities, social science, business and law, and the particularly high loss rate of women in science, technology, engineering, maths and medicine. We commit to tackling the gender pay gap, and we know this is a problem. It's a problem in the UK. I don't know if it's a problem here, but it certainly is in the UK, and that's something that is about to be under scrutiny because we are going to be obliged, the government is very keen for this to happen, to reveal senior pay by gender. So those data will be published. We commit to removing the obstacles faced by women, in particular at major points of career development and progression, including the transition from PhD into a sustainable academic career. We commit to addressing the negative consequence of using short-term contracts for the retention and progression of staff in academia, particularly women. We commit to tackling the discriminatory treatment often experienced by trans people. We acknowledge that advancing gender equality demands commitment and action from all levels of the organisation, and in particular active leadership from those in senior roles. We commit to making and mainstreaming sustainable structural and cultural changes to advance gender equality, recognising that initiatives and actions that support individuals alone will not sufficiently advance equality. All individuals have identities shaped by several different factors. We commit to considering the intersection of gender and other factors wherever possible. So those are the principles. There are 3 levels of award available, and they're designed to encourage continuous progression, sustainable change. And there are awards for the whole institution, as I've said, and individual departments. And faculties can be conferred awards as long as their institution holds a bronze. Award holders have to reapply every 3 years and provide evidence of progress and completion of earlier action plans. And I'm sure, I mean, this is not a model that's unrecognised in either business or higher education from other organisations. I don't know whether you have an equivalent in Hong Kong to our Investors in People that we have in the UK, which is a kind of charter mark as regards good human resource practice and career development and programmes. And continuous progress is also a requirement there. So a bronze award recognises a solid foundation for eliminating discrimination, developing an inclusive culture that values all staff. A silver award recognises a significant record of activity and achievement by the institution in promoting equality and addressing challenges across the whole institution. And silver award winners demonstrate that equality is well embedded within the institution, with strong leadership in promoting the principles. And a gold award recognises sustained progression and achievement in promoting gender equality and addressing challenges particular to the discipline, well-established record of activity and achievement towards equality in the career progression of women, complemented by data demonstrating continued impact. And the gold departments are expected to be beacons of achievement in gender equality, championing and promoting good practice to the wider community. So I can go into more detail about how it works and the assessment process, but I won't here. I can respond to that, or you can look it up. Just to say that this is a model that is now being very widely recognised all across the world as having salience and transferability into other jurisdictions. It has been licensed for Ireland, and 2 institutions have already gained a bronze award. And they are about to roll it out, again, under licence across Australia. Okay, so the Australian higher education system is taking Athena Swan and adapting it. Fanny has already had a conversation with David Rubain, who's the Chief Exec of the Equality Challenge Unit, and I know that's a conversation that's ongoing. And indeed, he's talking to colleagues in South Africa as well. Peer review is very important to this whole process, and it's mixed gender. It's not just women looking at processes that are designed to advance the careers of women. So it is very much a whole sector initiative now. I like to think that although Dame Sally provided the leadership that gave it that good kick, that people are now interested in it more for its own sake, and the hunger for the gender equality mark in the other disciplines, I think, demonstrates that it's not simply instrumental in terms of being able to apply for funding from the NIHR. There are some research councils and learned societies that are also signing up for it, and these are very, very welcome developments, because I think we all know that academics' attention is sharpened when research funders are interested in developments. So, just to finish with some more parochial bits of evidence in terms of the kinds of processes that I led at Brookes and we are now doing at Liverpool. I've already mentioned that the key to getting enough women in senior roles is about increasing numbers in the professoriate. Senior appointments are made from the professoriate in general, and if only 20% across the sector of professors are women, then you're fishing in a much smaller pool. So one of the things that we can recognise when we make professorial appointment in our institutions is that there may be multiple routes to professorial appointment, particularly in areas where you want people actively to come in from the professions, so in management and business, in law, in architecture, in these professions, recognising people's professional practice in terms of their qualifications for promotion. Also, the learning and teaching excellence route to professorial promotion. It is the case that more women are channeled into that teaching route than a purely research route. For what reasons we can conjecture. There is some research on it, but I won't go into that now. And also the inclusion of part-time staff. So proportionally, why would you not allow someone to, male or female, in one of those disciplines I just named, to apply for professorial appointment if proportionally their research is of the quality, but maybe it's there not in quantity, but it is in quality, and they hold a part-time role. Mentoring is very, very important, effective mentoring. He for she is a very, very important aspect. And in fact, one of the things that the 30% Club talk about a lot is the fact that the women who have male mentors senior in their organisation often do a lot better than those who have identified a senior woman to mentor them. Again, we can conjecture why that might be the case. One thing that they have introduced at Aberystwyth University that I'm shamelessly copying at Liverpool is that everyone applying for professorial appointment, everyone, not just women, is given the opportunity, a period of months. It's 6 months at Aber. We've only managed to get in 3 months ahead because of the timescale at Liverpool. Applies to have a mentor, somebody who's either recently been through the process or who is senior, has that kind of role, to talk about their application with, not their head of department and not their usual research. It could be somebody in a different discipline. It's about readiness. It's about, it could be anyone. And we've asked at Liverpool for people to volunteer to work with aspirant professorial candidates. Now, this might have a double effect. It might say to some applicants, more often male than female, who are just putting in an application just on the off chance that they might get it. Well, I'm qualified in half, that'll do. And might encourage women who are just like, I'm not ready yet. Well, probably you are. To put in applications. So we're hoping that process in advance of applying, someone to talk through the application, talk through their readiness, support them, etc., will make a difference to the numbers of application, because one of the problems is that women don't put applications in the same numbers. Flexible working practices, I cannot take credit for the way in which this worked at Oxford Brookes. They were already embedded and in place before I got there, but they were certainly very good for men and for women. You could compress your working hours. As I've already said, part-timers were eligible for application, for promotion, and working from home, part-year working, was part of the practice. This is also the case at Liverpool. But not everything is about family life. Not everything is about, providing the opportunities for women to keep in touch, to re-enter the workforce, to stay, in a sense, connected to the institution whilst they're on maternity leave. It's also about cultures, and it's also about the things that we do without kind of thinking about it, what we put in job specifications, what governing bodies and councils put in job specifications when they're advertising posts, and the desirables that they quite often build in without really thinking about the implications. I was having a conversation with someone who runs a large petroleum manufacturer distributor, a big operation. And their board, he said, to join the board, you have to have worked, we're trying to bring down the average age of membership, he said, and I've got no women at all. He said, I said, well, what do you have to have done to be eligible for board membership? You have to have worked abroad for at least 10 years. So I said, well, if you're looking for people at the age of 40 to join your board, you've just disqualified most women, haven't you? Because if they have been abroad for a decade, they've probably been attached to somebody as part of a family. They haven't probably, during the first 18 years of their career, had an opportunity to bank 10 years worth. Not all women have families, of course, so some women may have done that, but actually you're already discriminating against women by putting that 10-year qualification in there for your board members. So many things that we do, and many things that we do without thinking, have adverse effects on people that we want to encourage to come forward for applications. We can change recruitment and selection practices. Some of my colleagues have been calling for an executive search firm code of practice. Again, Vince Cable on the private sector side called for and got an executive search firm code of practice. There's not one in higher education, and all senior posts these days are handled by headhunters. I don't know whether, again, it's the same in Hong Kong or not, but it certainly is in the UK. I think the way in which people are recommended is also, about picking the brains of people, word of mouth, and because there are fewer women in top positions. I was recently looking for a senior person to lead a health and life sciences faculty, and one of the few, there are only 2 women deans of medicine in the UK, Glasgow, and I've forgotten where the other one is, Keele. And so on the Council of Deans, there can only be 2 out of the 30, because there are only 2. But Anna Domrachik, who's at Glasgow, was telling me that she gets 10 phone calls a week from headhunters wanting women recommendations for those posts. And she simply can't, she doesn't return their calls. A, because, she's run out of suggestions, and B, because she's just one woman answering their calls, because they rely on picking the brains of others. So if you've only got a few women in those positions, then there's a limited amount of knowledge coming through. But I think we can do work on unconscious bias. We can do work on gendered notions of leadership if we are more mindful, if we're more self-aware in terms of what we're doing and the practices that we follow. And as I've said, TMP now has some part of it that's dedicated to equality and diversity issues in the senior leadership team. I just wanted to finish by talking a little bit about positive action. If you've got two candidates of equal status and value in the UK under EU law, it is possible to discriminate in favour of the underrepresented. And so this would apply to men if there were fewer men in a team than women. It is possible to discriminate if you've got two actually totally equal candidates. Is that the case in Hong Kong, in law? Positive action? Only at that point, no?
Well, if they, I think if you can demonstrate it, special measure, but you have to,
Yeah.
bring in both justification.
Okay, so it is possible in European Union law, but there are people who object to even this much positive action. They say that it tries to remedy women's underrepresentation by reverse discrimination against men, that it undermines meritocracy, that it's difficult to apply in practice and would lead to legal challenges, that changing the numbers of women doesn't guarantee a change of culture, and that women and other underrepresented groups want to be appointed on merit and not because of positive action. Now, those are arguments that I'm sure you've all heard in terms of a kind of do nothing. Do nothing then, do nothing. These are all, in a sense, valid objections, but I believe there is a counter-argument for all of them, not least the last, because, as I said, quotas are illegal. It's also illegal to discriminate positively. You can only take positive action if you've got two candidates who are equal. And so what this in effect means is that that decision is rarely taken under the banner of positive action. I've certainly never sat on an appointment panel where it has been invoked. But it doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't talk more about it, and that we shouldn't think about, in a sense, what qualities it is we're balancing when we discuss appointments. Fanny started off by talking about numbers of students in universities, and one of the common features we have between our systems is that women students outnumber male students in the UK, although obviously the discipline variations are significant. Engineering, for instance, by far majority of men, nursing, education, by far the majority of women, etc. But I always like to just complicate the notions of quotas a little bit for people. One of my colleagues in medicine at Liverpool told me that she was admitted to medical school at Liverpool, in fact, when the quota for women was 10%. There was a quota of 10%. It couldn't go above. Only 10% of medical students were permitted to be women. So there was a quota once. And the Quentin McCullough, who used to be principal of the Royal Veterinary College, is now at Hertfordshire, told me that in response to the chuntering from his colleagues in the vet school, where more than 70% of students are now women, they're saying, how did this happen? When did this happen? Where all these girls come from? He went back through the applications, and the application numbers from women have always been the same. They just didn't used to let them in. So, certain things have changed, and quotas have existed. Those of us who took the 11 plus in the UK, quotas existed so that more boys than girls that boys could pass at a lower pass rate. So quotas have always existed, but now, in a sense that it's about addressing underrepresentation. Yeah, I'm sorry, it is true.
Well, we both did that exam, and I don't think we knew that.
Oh, really? Well, it only came to light in Northern Ireland when they were tackled on gender equality grounds, and they had to admit that the pass mark was lower for boys. In my hometown, which was Bath, there were twice as many grammar schools for boys as there were for girls. So there was 1 for girls and 2 for boys. So the pass mark was significantly lower for boys. But, well, it's about... Well, it's not the case anymore, yeah, and the grammar schools aren't in the same numbers. I don't quite know what they do in order to make sure that they get sufficient gender balance in authorities in counties where they still have that exam. But so quotas have always existed, is my point, and we should just be, I think, a little less. We can't have that about how we interpret quotas. I mean, who would mind, for instance, if we said on a board, for instance, that we had a quota of 40% men, 40% women, and 20% leeway in the middle? That sounds quite balanced to me, but it would still be a quota, which at the moment is not possible in our system in the UK. And I will leave it there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Janet. You have given us a lot of food for thought, because of all the different measures and practices in the UK that has been effective in changing some of the situation. But I think we also need to consider what would be feasible in Hong Kong. At this point, I'd like to invite Suzanne Choi from the Gender Research Center. She is also a newly appointed member of the Equal Opportunities Commission in Hong Kong now. So she will share with us she will respond to what Janet has said, and also share with us the situation at the Chinese University, and then we can open up for more suggestions from the floor.
So good morning, Professor Janice Beer, and then good morning, colleagues. I'm really honored to be the discussant of this roundtable. And as you also can feel my pressure that I have to speak in front of so many of my bosses and to tell them probably they have not done enough to improve gender equality at the Chinese University. But I hope that they will forgive me if the sharing or the comments, that follow will be a little bit more provocative. Okay, but I think Janet's sharing is really inspiring. And, in her presentation, I think she focused on three main issues. The first one is whether there's a need for positive action to improve gender equality in higher education. And also the second question is that if there's a need, what are the measures that we have to take, and what measures will be considered just and fair for all? Because I think, and after all, we are living in a society with half of the population men and women. So, if there's any action, then these actions need to be supported and also, approved by men. So I think she has spent some time talking about what measures, are just and fair for all. And I think the last issue is what measures are effective. So I think these sharings, these three questions are really important. And Janet has shared with us the UK data and context. And Fanny, in her opening remark, she shared with us, some statistics which is relevant to the whole Hong Kong institutions. So now I'm going to show you some statistics which are relevant to the Chinese University. Okay, so this is a graph that I just finished with some help of some colleagues last night. And this is data showing that the gender composition of all staff at the Chinese University in 2014. As you can see from the graph, at CUHK here, we have many more women than men. In total, we have 7,355 staff, and then the female staff outnumber male staff. But if you look at, the distribution of women and men at Chinese University, you can also see that women concentrate in Term B and Term C categories. For Term C category, these are more about non-skilled staff, and Term B category is more clerical staff. So you see in Term C staff, women, the figure of women are double the figure of men, and in Term B staff as well, the number of women, female staff, we have 3,000, and male staff we have 1,900. But as we move up the occupational ladder, to higher ranking categories, then we see that the reverse pattern is true, that we have only 500 female staff in Term A and HA. These are professorial appointments and also managers, I think, more. And then we have many more men. The number of Term A staff, male colleagues, nearly double the number of female colleagues. And if we look at another graph, this is focused only on faculty members. So I include in this chart assistant professors, associate professors, and professor and full professor. And the Chinese university here, if Janet, I will give you a little bit explanation. The professor rank, we include reader, professor 1 and 2, and then the full professor, they are professor of subject and A3 professor, so they're most senior. As you can see from this diagram, when we look at, and this diagram is a trend data. It shows data from 2005 to 2015. If you look at this data, in all these professorial categories, women are underrepresented. But in particular, when we move up the ladder, when we go to full professor, in the last 10 years, we only have around 10% of women full professors at Chinese university. And then we go to professor. The percentage is slightly higher, but they're still very low, much lower than the 20% benchmark, which is adopted, or, not to mention 50%. But when we go to associate professor, the number is still slightly higher, but still remain at around, a third, 30%. And then we go to assistant professor, it's less than 40%. But I think what is really worrying for me when I was looking at this chart is that I think there's sentiments which is quite prevalent at a Chinese university, is a sentiment that, okay, women are latecomers of the higher education because of historical, issues. And so they will eventually catch up. And so Chinese university was established in 1965, and now we are having our 50 years anniversary. And so have women catch up after 50 years? And I think this graph clearly shows that women haven't, catch up. And my question is, will women catch up in the next 10 years or next 50 years? And it seems that if you look at, the developments between 2005 and 2015, I think the answer is quite pessimistic. Is that, you look at this chart, we are expecting, Janet was talking about continued improvement. But here, we seem to have a stagnation. In the last 10 years, it's quite flat, the chart. And I will give you another data, which is really worrying. It's the number of assistant professors recruited to Chinese university in the last 10 years. I look at the data, and what I was surprised is that I was expecting the number of female assistant professors, the junior ranks of professors, to increase over the last 10 years. But then what I saw in the data is that they haven't increased. They have remained the same. And my experience, I joined Chinese University 12 years ago. And after I joined Chinese University, we have few more female colleagues. But then at that time, I heard a lot of panic, from everybody, male and female colleagues, saying that we cannot have more women, otherwise we'll be turned into a women's department. And so, but then at that time, I was asking my colleagues, but look, in the last 40 years, we have all men, so how come nobody was panicking? That now we are all men, we are men's departments. And how come when we started to have women, everybody's panicking, okay? So I think this is, data for everybody to think about. We will catch up in the next 50 years or 10 years without any positive intervention, okay. Okay, here we move to gender female leadership representation. At the Chinese university, I don't know, even though I have been here for 12 years, I don't know which body is the most powerful. I suppose it's the UADPC, which is designing, the promotion, of, staff. And I just got a question from a female colleague, in the audience, do you know the gender composition of this body? And I don't know. So maybe some of my bosses down, you can tell us the information. If we look at this female leadership representation, which shows only heads of departments and units, and we see that, it's also, like the graph of the previous graph. It's, from 2005 and 2014, we have seen really virtually very, very small improvements in women's representation as heads, as department heads or heads of units. And I think maybe this is a question that we have to all think why this is the case. In Janet's presentation, she was talking about the obstacles, to gender equality. And I think one issue that she mentioned was really interesting is that a lot of these obstacles, they're really subtle. Like she said, about the recruitment, what you put on the advertisement, and also the criteria for board membership. These are really subtle, obstacles. And, nobody, it's not really somebody is intentionally discriminating against women. I think it's just that my own experience tell me it's just that because most of the leaders are men, and because all these men often have a housewife or a wife to support them. So when they make decisions, they take many things for granted. They didn't realize putting this criteria is disadvantaging another category. I will give you an example. 3 years ago, I applied for sabbatical leave. And then when I was looking at the requirements, suddenly there's a requirement saying that all applicants for sabbatical leave have to go overseas. Otherwise, they, will not be granted sabbatical leave. And then I was reading this, I said, gosh, I'm a mother of 2, and my sabbatical leave is only 3 months. If I have to go overseas, who will be looking after my children? Am I going to take them out of school and fund schools in the overseas, and then 3 months later I have to come back and look for another school for them? So it was really hard. And then I talked to the dean. I say, why we have this criteria? Sabbatical leave is for us to do research. We can do research here. Why do we need to go overseas? And this will also disadvantage people with family responsibility. And do you know our dean, he's really kind. And he said, gosh, I didn't realize that. I say, okay, you are very lucky because this was never a problem for you. But now we do have a lot of female colleagues, female professors, male professors who have family responsibility. And I think so here is a question about, I think, I have been here for 12 years and I have been, along other institutions, other colleagues at other institutions. I think most of us are good-hearted. And I think nobody wants to intentionally discriminate against women. I think it's just that because we have this underrepresentation of women in the leadership positions, and so the needs of this particular category, their problems are not, are not being well addressed. People in position to make decisions, often they are not aware of the problems of the criteria they set up. So here, I think going back to Janet's, sharing of the positive intervention, I think there are 3 points that I'm really, impressed and, inspired, and I would like to share with you. The first one is that I think we are talking about equality, but we have to realize that, we want to be equal, but women and men, given, the existing system, the family arrangements, they do have different responsibility and different needs. So sometimes it's a very difficult balance. We want to have an equal outcome, but the equal outcome may not mean that we have to have equal provision. I'll give you an example about toilets. The Hong Kong government for years have argued that we have to have same number of female and male toilets. They have to have the same size. But at the end, this results in inequality. Women often need to have, wait much longer for the use of toilets. And this is why, because although you want to have equality in outcome, but if you don't address the inequality or differences in needs, then you end up with inequality in outcomes. So I think Janet was sharing that in the UK, for professor appointments, they now consider diverse routes. And I think this is incredibly important. You have, consider maybe there's alternative criteria. The second point, which I think is really important, is about mentoring. I think a lot of the issue is that because of historical reasons, many more leaders are men. And so when women are considering whether they will, are good enough for leadership or promotion, they often have this hesitation because they don't have the role model. And sometimes they also got really a lot of discouragement in a very subtle way and kind-hearted way. I remember 2 years ago when I was applying for professorship, I was asked, do you think you're too young? And I look at the person who told me this, and he was really trying to help me. And I'm thinking, will you ask this question to a male colleague? Okay, so I think mentoring is really important. But of course, the thing is to choose the right mentor. Okay, and the third one, I think is really important, is that when we are talking about women leadership, of course, women themselves, need to improve. Yeah, because I think at the end of the day, we want to have a qualified leader. We want to have a leader with a merit. So women's self-employment improvement is incredibly important. But I think we also, history has demonstrated to us, the data for the past 50 years in Chinese university in Hong Kong has demonstrated to us that, women's self-improvement may not be, enough to, move forward or, initiate change. So we need to have cultural and attitudinal change. I want to share a little bit about culture. 5 years ago, we have a female colleague at, a department. She got tenure, so she organized a dinner party to thank everybody. And she was giving a speech. She said, I thank everybody's support, and I will continue to work hard, and I hope that I will be as productive as before in the next 5, 10, and 15 years. And then there's a very, very, very senior male colleague make a joke, openly say, so how about we're productive? So when she was talking about, I want to be more productive as a professor, and then the male colleague said, she thought, I think the male colleague didn't mean to offend, but I think it just didn't come to him that, this sentence by saying, so how about your reproduction, is inappropriate. So I think culture change and attitudinal change is incredibly important. And I think transformational organizational structure and commitments. I think Janet's share of the Athena Swan Charter is a very good example about that organizations needs to have some commitments, because I think for sustainable change, we need to have commitments, and we need to have a clear set of benchmark, and we need to have accountability, and then we need to have transparency. About this transparency point is my last point. Janet was talking about gender pay gap. And in fact, I have been raising issue about can the university release data on gender pay gap? Because we haven't had this data. So I think if we don't have the data, then there's no way for us to assess gender equality. So I think I probably have said too much. And so I will end my discussion here. Thank you very much.
With this, I'd like to open up to the floor for them to raise any questions, comments, and responses to the points that have been discussed so far.
First of all, I'd like to thank Vice Chancellor Beer for an excellent speech. And I think you have given us a lot of inspiration how we should move forward in Hong Kong and in this university. And looking around in this room, I have to apologize that most of the portraits, in fact, all of the portraits are men as well. I do hope that one day very soon we'll have a female on the wall. But this is certainly not my responsibility, however. I just want to raise one point you mentioned, that somehow the discrepancy between men and women ratio, it's more in the professorial grade, but perhaps not so much in the administrative grade. And as a matter of fact, around this table, you can see that in our university, the director of personnel office, director of space allocation, and the bursar, they all are women. And is there any reason why women do better in administrative jobs than in academic jobs? Have you think about that?
I can't give you anything by way of evidence, except to say that I think that on the professional side, I mean, nobody is really surprised when the director of HR is a woman. It's a kind of woman's profession. The director of finance, increasingly in the UK, directors of finance are women. Many women have been able to sustain careers through family-focused years by doing part-time work in school bursars and that kind of thing, and part-time qualifications. The accountancy profession has always been brilliant at distance learning, online learning, bringing people through the profession to professional qualifications. So, you know, not in a linear way, but, you know, keeping people up to date in terms of qualification. Also, women coming in and out of the workforce. I think what you've done in your career at the point at which you left and then came back counts for more in the professions. There's less kind of, oh, but you're behind the curve now, you're not up to date with the recent research, that kind of thing. So I just think that not all the professions, obviously, but many of the professions are more positive environments for women. There is something about academic culture, there's something about professorial culture, and I can't quite get hold of it, but there is something that is predominantly homosocial about it. It is a more male environment, and not just in the STEM disciplines, across the piece, in social sciences, in management and business, etc. So I can't give you evidence. It's a piece of work that needs to be done, I think, about why, in a sense, the professoriate is lagging behind the professional services in universities. I don't know whether anyone else has better insight than I do.
One thing that I'm still struggling a bit about is about quotas. I'm always thinking that we should, in the free society, we should have the best person to get the best job, instead of setting a quota that we must have X% of professors to be, or X% of department chairs should be men or women. So what is, I heard that you briefly mentioned that you are not so much against quota. So I'd like to just open this for discussion, perhaps. What is people's view?
Well, just to say that's totally fair. I'm not actually against quotas, because I think sometimes, and actually the graph that we've just been shown might be one of those instances, nothing changes. Despite goodwill, nothing changes unless you do something drastic. So I'll give you an example. This isn't quota-based, but Norman Gower, who was, he was in the Open University for many years, and he was also at Royal Holloway as principal. He did away with elections to Senate because he said they produced the same people every time. Men of a particular age, usually with a union affiliation. There was a big turnout for them. He said he was never going to get any diversity. And so he did away with elections and picked people. Now, sounds very undemocratic, doesn't it? It sounds counterintuitive in terms of varying the composition of a body that was elected before. But actually it was the only way in which he could see any change being effected, was by actually picking people and bringing them forward. So in terms of quotas, I mean, I would prefer targets. Comply or explain is what Mervyn Davies has been doing. But I think with quotas, it does force some creative thinking. It forces people to pay attention to the pipeline in a way that they may not other. So it's not the quota itself, it's the action that it provokes. And I know many senior women who have been on boards for many, many years, who are, you know, the great and good in our society, who now say, I've been waiting for change, and I've been waiting and I've been waiting, and I used to be absolutely against quotas. I wanted everybody to know I'd earned my spot, you know, and that there was no favourable, but now I'm sick of waiting. And so I think the only way in which we're going to force the change there is by having a quota here. And so that's what I would say about quotas. Nobody thinks that they're desirable, but let's face it, they changed Indian society.
Thank you very much for your excellent speech. And I do think about the gender equality issues in higher education. As a junior member, I really experienced such kind of gender differences because the whole structure of higher education is actually dominated by male. I mean, the structure itself is not favorable for female to take up PhD education or even postdoctoral positions because of the age, which they have reached certain age, then they get married and they have pressure from their families. Just like for my batch of classmates, which we are right now early 30s, and I guess most of my classmates who can take up PhD studies are male because they do not have that burden from their family, which probably you may need to spend 4 or 5 years if you're lucky enough in Hong Kong and get it, or if probably you have to go overseas, which many females, they cannot leave their family duties behind and pursue their PhD study. So I guess this is quite a structural issue in higher education, which probably lead to aftermath that we talk about higher positions in the profession, in this profession, whether we do have more senior members who are female, but structurally, we do not have that many females who can pursue higher education in this sector. So that's what I am worrying about, because just like in my department, we are social work department already, which is a profession dominated by female, but most of the researchers are actually male. So that is actually a very large gender gap in our research and practical skills as well. So, but another question on the quota system. I do not disagree with quota system actually. And in our government structure, we do try to maintain 35% of female membership in our statutory bodies. But of course, this percentage has never been reached, particularly for most of the advisory bodies. But then it actually also comes back to the problem of whether we have appointed female members and they really bring about changes on gender equality, and whether do have a sense of gender sensitivity, which I do not mind if a male members, but then he have a strong gender equality or sensitivities towards this issue. So as a junior member, I would actually expect if there are a better gender proportion in our managerial structure in the university, that actually could lead to more discussion among all the hierarchies, from junior level staff even to the administrative staff, how they can have a better gender environment in the university, rather than they are still making their managerial decisions without consulting the junior members who are females or even males in this university to maintain a gender-sensitive environment. Thank you.
Sorry. Peter, I'm sorry I stopped you from talking.
Thanks, Fanny. So yeah, I'd like to also pick up the point about what we're actually going to do about it. I don't think there's any question that there's a problem. I think we just have to decide what we're going to do about it and pick up the point that Joseph made about meritocracy. But just before I do that, a couple of comments on Janet's presentation, if I may. I mean, I'm Sally Davis's #1 fan. She's an amazing, courageous and very forceful woman in a very influential position in the government. But the reason that she could do what she did was because of the link with funding. Nobody in a medical school in the UK was able to ignore. Many people, including people where I was working, didn't like it or disagreed with it, but no one could ignore it because of the link with funding. So I suppose one big question for us in Hong Kong, and I don't know what Joseph thinks, I mean, I think I've not seen any evidence that there might be a willingness in the government funding agency to link funding in any sense to progress on this particular issue. But that's why it worked in the UK. Or actually, it's England, because Sally's responsibility is England. Scotland actually was already a little bit more emancipated than England anyway in that respect. But actually, her funding influences on England, because that's the jurisdiction that she funds, but it had an impact around the whole UK. So it's the link with funding, and I think for Hong Kong there may be a lesson there. And then also to pick up the point that Suzanne made about what she called catching up. So when primed by Sally Davis, I was at the time Dean of a medical and dental faculty, and her initiative was fantastic for me because I was already trying to do something on gender equity, and what she gave me was the ammunition. But the commonest response I met was that it's just a matter of time, that medical student populations are female predominant, and that it's just a matter of time. You just have to wait. You're just being impatient, and it's nothing to do with bias or anything else. And the graphs in the UK look flat, like those lines you showed. So the medical student population in the UK has been female predominant for 25 years. And if you look in that 25 years whether there's been a change at the senior levels of medicine in gender equity, the answer is no. So there's no sign that the just waiting for, just a matter of time argument is true. I think it's absolutely not true. And so I don't have any time for it. The other point I wanted to just pick up, so Bob Ness and colleagues at the British Council hosted an event the other day, just recently, which Fanny was there, where Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, was the principal guest. And she gave a presentation about women in leadership, not talking about academia, because this was a general topic, but I was a member of the panel in order to represent the academic side of it. And I asked her a question which I thought she gave a fantastic answer to. And the question I asked her was, I'm impatient for change. I want to do something, and I want to do it relatively quickly. How do I do that whilst maintaining a meritocracy? Because I believe in a meritocracy. She said she believes in a meritocracy. I'm sure you do. I'm sure all of us do. But how, if we're going to say that, how do we achieve change and maintain that? And her answer, I thought, was brilliant. I mean, Bob will be able to remember better than me, probably. But if I paraphrase what she said, what we need to do is we need to turn that argument on its head. So she said, I would like to live in a meritocracy, but I don't at the moment. And so therefore, I would like to turn it into a meritocracy. What's meritocratic about a board or any kind of statutory body having 80 or 90% men? That's not meritocratic. No one questions the merit. So if you have a quota or whatever mechanism to put more women into those positions, someone will say, are they doing it on merit, or are they just doing it because you're trying to change the numbers? And Nicola's argument was, look at it the other way around. At the moment, are they there on merit? Are these 80 or 90% men there on merit? What's meritocratic about that? And I thought that was a terrific answer.
It also, what it does is it takes us away from fix the women. It's not about fixing the women, it's about the cultures and the processes and the questions we ask ourselves.
And that's why I signed up to he for she, because and I know he for she is controversial. There are some women and some bodies trying to achieve gender equity that think he for she is misguided. They think it's almost expecting the men to solve the problem, if you like. But the argument for he for she, which I found convincing, was that men are the problem. Men are part of the problem, if not all of the problem. And actually, if you don't address the men, you won't ever change the culture. And so that's why I like he for she.
Just following on that really inspiring comment about... Oh, yes, my name's Mimi from the Faculty of Law. I guess, sort of what this roundtable for me has suggested, academia is my second career, and I'm in that particular bracket that Janet's talked about, the 30 to 39. I came from corporate law, which this was even bigger problem than academia, where we would actually have really chauvinistic comments made at senior partner level by men, not too dissimilar to those made, for example, by Tim Hunt. For those outside the UK, this is a biochemist who notoriously said a few weeks ago that problem with having women in the lab is that first you fall in love with them, second they fall in love with you, and third, when you ask them questions, they cry. So I guess the problem here we've identified are not those chauvinistic ones, although they exist, but the structural problems as highlighted. And I think just observing from the audience, who participates in these sort of women's events, just besides the senior men, you're kind of obliged to come, let's face it. I'm sure Fanny, does a great job convincing you. There's one man in the audience, and so I think, your point, Peter, about it is men are the problem is very true. And I just really hope that, the men at my level, at a junior level, who, are potential fathers, do come to these events, and that we don't portray this issue, gender equality in higher education, as simply a women's issue, because it's not. And it is disappointing to see that there's only one man in the room besides the, round table. I mean, maybe in the UK there might be more men. That was, in my previous institution was also very backward. It was Oxford, so, there was certainly sort of chauvinism, particularly among the 7-year-old dons. I think that's part of the challenge. How do we, I'm not saying that all of us, aspire to be Sweden, but in Sweden, for example, the parental leave for men is outstanding, and that slowly has changed the culture there over the last 20 years. So I'm hoping one day we could be closer to the Swedish model, but I think we need to involve men, particularly at my level and in my generation, and hopefully we'll see some change, because those numbers that Susan, you presented are just really depressing, especially at the junior assistant professor level. Thank you.
I think we should also spend some time to, listen to the voices of our colleagues as to what they want us, the universities in Hong Kong to do, and what type of support they hope, and what type of changes they like to see. Yeah. Can we get some responses from our participants? Yes, Juliana.
Juliana Chen from the Faculty of Medicine. I enjoy the lecture very much, and by the way, I'm actually an alumni of University of Liverpool. Yeah, so yeah, so I think all the points are well taken, but the key point is really what is good for the society, what is good for the institution. I think that's the key question. The world is made up of 50% of women, right? And men and women have different needs, they have different strengths, they have different way of solving a problem, they have different way of actually seeing problems. And in the university, there are many, many problems apart from academia. We are here to actually generate solutions for the society. And if you don't have enough representation from the 50%, of the world or the society, sometimes the decision may not be as complete as it would be. And I think, it would be good to have more women being represented, at a higher level, not just to reflect some of our younger women sort of colleagues, but really I think in each faculty you are actually dealing with problems. And I think, women and men sometimes think differently, and I think we are created like that. We are supposed to be yin-yang and complementing one another. So I think, I look forward to our leadership to actually make some change, because it is important, really. The university is just a microsome of the society, right? And I think we should demonstrate that gender sensitivity and gender tolerance to make the world somewhat better. It's very philosophical, but I think when you look at data like this, it's actually worrying. When you have so many female graduates, and they can do a lot, but they are all disappearing in the upper level. So time to reflect.
Sorry, one of the things that I wanted to do was to offer not solutions, but things that can be done, because there's nothing worse than, a talk that just says, "Oh, hell in a handcart, everything's terrible, it's grim and there's no way out." It is very important. It's very, very much solution-oriented in the way in which I look at things, and I think we can make improvements without, a quota imposition. But we need to set ourselves ambitious targets, and we need to find the stimulation. I do absolutely agree with Peter. The thing that made the difference was attaching it to funding, because that was then it would have been giving up a huge source of research income for universities to exclude themselves from that competition. And so that made all the difference, which is why if we can get the research councils to take the same kind of action, it will be job done, I think, in terms of the way in which universities can be led to change.
I think, to follow up on what we hope the university would do or the higher education in Hong Kong would do. I remember when Fanny was the founding director of the Gender Research Center, there's one achievement that she achieved was really remarkable for Hong Kong society, is to push forward for the Hong Kong government, the Census and Statistics Department, to publish regularly data on men and women. And I think, because we are in a society which is based on, and we need to make policy based on evidence, and we need to have transparency. And also, only because when we have evidence and transparency, then we can ask for accountability, and to have some, foundation to ask for change. And I think in the university level, thanks to the task force, now we have this 10-year trend data, but I think there's still a lot of data gaps. So, for example, I was asking for gender pay gap, and so gender the pay data by gender, and I don't know. I think there's no certain definite answer. But I think if the university, at least from can start to compile and release data comparing the two categories, men and women, and on different measures. And I think this will be a first step, and it will be quite helpful for further discussion of what measures to take and what change to foster. Yeah.
I just wanted to make the comment. I wouldn't want Janet to go away from this meeting thinking that there's a particular problem at Chinese U. This is a sector problem in Hong Kong. Actually, the data from Hong Kong, from my university, look rather similar to the data that you presented, with the exception that Chinese U is better than Hong Kong U for female representation at senior level. And recently got better again. So this is a sector issue. And I don't think it's a sector issue only in Hong Kong. I think it's a sector issue in many parts of the world. So we shouldn't get too focused on the fact that we've got to find Hong Kong solutions. Some of these are generic sector solutions. I think there is a Hong Kong context, which is interesting. And one thing that I've learned today, which I hadn't really appreciated before, I'm a big fan of overseas attachments. I'm a big fan of people getting experience. And most of my attention to this has really been at the student level, but I think students in Hong Kong should have experience outside Hong Kong. But the fact that overseas requirements might be limiting the access to some schemes like sabbaticals, for example, for women, is an interesting point. And I think that's something that we need to think about. And this is what Sally Davis did for me. I mean, I had a lot of conversations with Sally Davis about Athena Swan, but what she did for me was wake me up to unconscious bias. I became aware that a number of things that I had done over the years could be categorized as unconscious bias, and I regard myself as an unbiased individual. So the fact that I was doing that means that unconscious bias is a problem, and it's that kind of thing is unconscious bias. So those are my two feelings, really. One is that we need to address this as a sector. So in terms of publication of data, I've just funded some work by a researcher, Sarah Aston, who I'm sure you know, in my Faculty of Education, is going to do some work on the sector in Hong Kong, the government-funded sector, so including Chinese U. And I hope Joseph will support me when we have a discussion about this we have a meeting called HUCOM, which is the heads of the 8 government institutions, of which at the moment I'm the convener. And I'm at the next meeting, I want to, at the very least, get the organizations to agree to participate in providing data and publishing it. Because I think that's the starting point for me. And then I think I know what the data is going to show, and then we need to understand why, and then we need to say, what are we going to do about it? But I quite agree, the starting point is open, transparent publication of data.
I'm Gillian Q from the Chinese University Women's Organisation, and mine's a more general question observation is that you mentioned very briefly the issue of transgendered individuals. How do you feel that this should be tackled in the future with regard to the leadership challenge?
What should be tackled, sorry?
The potential for the transgendered individual, male, trans to female, how does this affect the gender bias?
that's way beyond my competence. You know, I can't begin to answer that one, and I know that it is heavily theorised and a heavily contested area. All I would say is that there is attention to trans individuals at the Equality Challenge Unit, and some very, very helpful publications that are widely available on publicly available on the ECU internet as resources about the treatment of transgender people in higher education, which obviously should be equal. But there are complexities around intersectionality in terms of trans colleagues that, as I said, I'm reluctant to kind of get into, because it's contested space even in the trans community. So I think, to all intents and purposes, we should be gender blind, colour blind, ability blind, etc. when we're considering colleagues for positions of leadership, and that would apply.
I'd like to mention Gillian's organization. We're trying to enlist them to help us to see if we can improve our childcare resources at the university. But no, on that I'd like to also advertise that we'll be coming up with a survey to all staff on their childcare needs and what they want the university to consider in terms of providing. But it's not easy, particularly when there are different options outside of campus, and we really don't know the demand or the type of provision that faculty and staff would need. But our CU Women's Organization would be a very resourceful partner.
Can I make a request to do that jointly with us, because we're doing exactly the same thing at Hong Kong U, so it would be good if we could do it jointly.
Other suggestions from colleagues?
I agree with everything that's been said. What I want to come back is to look at how we achieve it in the context of Hong Kong. While we agree that it is far from satisfactory, there can be a hard sell or soft sell approach. And the feedback from my female colleagues, because I also have a particular interest in this field, I think Fanny was aware that we talked about this, is that they do not particularly want a preferential treatment. In fact, they do not want to be seen to have preferential treatment. They only want to be given the equal opportunities. And you've highlighted some of the aspects of the female characteristics that you can't provide the same opportunities to males and females without changing some context. And therefore, I think it would be, for me, it would be much more useful if we concentrate on improving those factors that will enable female colleagues to compete on equal grounds with females. Like, I think the first, and we should be ashamed of that we don't provide very good breastfeeding facilities, the childcare facilities on campus, and all the things. We mentioned about the mentorship, which was very interesting, that Janet raised, that sometimes seems like the compassionate, understanding male mentor seems to be even more beneficial than a successful female
I don't know that it's compassion, it's clarity of advice.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's particularly if you have someone like Peter, Joseph, who also have this buy-in for this, and be the female's colleagues' mentor. I think it's quite beneficial. My experience of some of the very successful female colleagues I had in the past, someone referred to Oxford, and I had that also, was that they're so proud of their pathway to success that they have competed not only on equal terms, but probably in adversity, that they probably want to encourage their junior colleagues to say, hey, come on, you do it my way, and people look at it, that involves a lot of sacrifice, and you're not perhaps my role model. So there's also a little bit of that, of whether we can improve on that mentorship aspect. And then the second aspect surrounding everything is whether we can only do it institutionally, because we are thinking about the institution. Someone referred to the context of society, and of course we have to show by example to society. But without the general positive awareness and similar pace of development, I think it's going to be still nearly an impossible task. For example, the family is equally important, and I haven't really heard a lot talked about that. We have this cliche of behind every successful man there's a successful woman. It should be the other way around. In fact, the way we also tackle some of these issues also should make it easier for the partner to help, because I'm pretty sure that most modern spouses are supportive of their spouse work, and that includes both ways. One example I have is I have a female trainee who wanted to go, and she's married to also a doctor, so both of them doctors. They both were told that they need overseas training. Unless they do that, it will be very difficult to advance their career. And and then they have problems of placement for both. They made the first choice institution vastly different places in the globe. So someone has to decide that, okay, I will take this same city, same institution, and then eventually it's the male partner the husband who said, okay, well, I'll go where. This very simple statement he made to his wife was, I'll go where you go, and make my take my leave just around your place of secondment, and that's how it resolved. So I think it has to be a holistic, comprehensive package, and not just one measure that will do the trick.
I mean, it's a large hope, but I mean, the point you make is a very good one. It's about a partnership. Now, I was guilty of this myself when I first went back to work after having children. I thought in terms of my salary paying for the childcare. Actually, I didn't make that baby on my own, and it didn't belong just to me. It was our income, but I thought of it only in terms of I've gone back to work, therefore my salary. And how many times have you heard women saying, I'm, covering the cost of childcare or whatever it is, instead of it being we in a relationship? And we have to think about parenting, as somebody mentioned earlier in Sweden, as a joint effort, not the responsibility of one or the other. But so much of this is about language, isn't it? And it's, that woman's ambitious. It's not necessarily a nice thing to say about a woman. That man's ambitious. That's quite a good thing to say about a man. And, at the moment that you have children, women are generally thought to go soft in the head, but men become even sharper in their appetite to become a breadwinner. It has a different effect on men and women in the way we talk about it. So I'll try and shut up after this, but I'll leave you with the words of my favourite role model, Beyonce. I'm not bossy, I'm the boss.